You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Welcome once again to another journey into the unknown, the unexplored, the unexplained. Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson. He's being very dramatic today.
Just for the opening of the show.
Well, geez, that's very dramatic.
I hope so.
I hope so, too. It's a dramatic show.
It's not like our show's about macrame or quilting. Maybe that's exciting to some people, too, though.
Maybe it is, yeah.
I can't say that it's not.
No, but that's not what the show's about. And if it was, it would be a very calm... calming, soothing...
Today on Quilting, we're going to talk about the stitch and the different aspects of the stitch and the different stitches involved.
That kind of sounds a little...
Little NPR-ish?
The stitch, huh? Kind of sounds a little...
Stitchy?
Yeah, stitchy. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Tonight's show is The Conjuring, the true story. So if you've seen the Ed and Lorraine inspired movie, The Conjuring, and there's been The Conjuring 2 and The Conjuring 3 is in the works, you'll know that these movies are each a different case of Ed and Lorraine Warren's files.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was the first movie they made based on this story. The story is true. The movie, from what I understand, from the actual family, the studio had them tone down the fear because they wanted a PG-13 movie. Not because of gore, not because of that. It was so scary, they said, you need to make it not so scary. And they're like, but this is what happened. They're like, we don't care.
And now, what year was that movie made again?
2012.
Okay, you would have thought these days they'd be a little bit more modern about these things, because
not if they want a PG-13 rating.
Okay, right.
Because they want more people to see it, more money to be made.
Okay.
Which I hate when a horror movie...
They water it down.
But I hate when a horror movie confines to a PG-13 slot, because you're basically telling the people who like horror movies, sorry, we're not going to give you what you're used to because we want to make money, and you're telling the PG-13 people, oh, you bring your kids, it's not going to be that scary. So who are you making it for?
What's the point, right?
Give them the kids' movies, I'm just saying. But it doesn't really need gore. I mean, scary, why does scary mean rated R? I don't understand that.
I don't think it always means,
intensity? I don't know.
Well, maybe because I guess they figure a certain age you don't get as scared. I don't know.
That could be, but I've seen a lot scary TV movies from the 70s.
So did I.
That are scarier.
So did I.
Times have changed.
I
changed.
guess so.
So we're going to talk about the real story of The Conjuring, the Perron family, and their farmhouse in Rhode Island. And they purchased this house in 1970 and actually lived there for 10 years. But we'll go into the details in specific about what they encountered, what happened on the property before they lived there, how old the house is, etc. And then if you haven't seen the movie, once you listen to the show, you can go watch the movie and you can make your own comparisons.
Right, make up your own mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is actually the true story behind that movie, the actual case itself. Some say it's more frightening than the movie was, but we'll let you judge based on the occurrences that happened in it. So when the movie was released in 2013, it was met with pretty much critical acclaim. A lot of critics thought it was really good, and all too realistic portrayal of a demonic haunting of a family from Rhode Island. However, the true story of The Conjuring is actually a pretty true experience with Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed, of course, was a World War II vet, and he was a police officer who later became a demonologist after studying the subject on his own. His wife, Lorraine, who's a self-clairvoyant, self-claimed, and a medium, was capable of communicating with demons that Ed discovered. So that's kind of nerve-wracking in itself. Mm-hmm. Ed and Lorraine Warren, in 1952, they founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. They gained notoriety and respected in paranormal investigators after investigating the Amityville hauntings. I think that's what really pushed them into the limelight, was the Amityville hauntings investigation. Mm-hmm. Their two most famous cases, however, were heavily popularized by the Conjuring franchise, a series of movies that, of course, focuses on their experiences of exorcising demons from two different possessed families. Though the movies seem over-dramatized and impossible, the Warrens maintain that all the events depicted were actually true and did happen. Ed died in 2006, and Lorraine was a consultant on the movie and claims that she didn't let the directors take any more dramatic license than was absolutely necessary. So the Perron family, minus Roger Perron, in January of 1971, shortly after moving into their haunted home. The true story of The Conjuring begins with the first film, which focuses on the Perron family. It's a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carol and Roger and their 5 daughters begin to notice strange things happening pretty much after they moved in, right away.
Yeah, it's a cute house, actually.
It is.
Yeah.
It started small. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing, or seemed to move from place to place on its own around the house.
I've experienced that.
Yep. She would hear the sound of something scraping against the kettle in the kitchen when no one was in there. She'd find small piles of dirt in the center of a newly cleaned kitchen floor. It's funny, I've actually read a number of books about hauntings, and that is a pretty common thing, little piles of dirt, earth, on a clean floor.
I wonder why somebody would do that. I mean, why that would be connected with spirit activity.
I don't know what it means.
Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty jolting. I mean, unless someone deliberately put it there and you have no explanation, that's pretty unnerving, I think.
It's probably just to get attention.
I think so.
Yeah.
The girls began to notice spirits around the house, though for the most part, they were harmless. There were a few, however, that were angry. Carolyn allegedly researched the history of the home and discovered that it had been the same family for 8 generations, the house, and that many of them had died under mysterious or horrible circumstances. Several of the children had drowned in a nearby creek, one was murdered, and a few of them had even hung themselves in the attic.
Oh my God.
The spirit was depicted in the film Bathsheba was the worst of all. Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house and resented the competition that my mother posed for that position, said Andrea Perron, the oldest of the 5 girls.
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba.
What a name.
It turns out there was actually a real person named Bathsheba Sherman who lived on the Perron's property in the mid-1800s. She was rumored to have been a Satanist, and there was evidence that she was involved in the death of a neighbor's child, though no trial ever took place. She was buried in a nearby Baptist cemetery in downtown Harrisville. Now, the Perrons believe it was Bathsheba's spirit that was tormenting them. According to Andrea, the family experienced other spirits as well that smelled like rotting flesh and would cause beds to rise off the floor. She claims her father would enter the basement and feel a cold, stinking presence behind him. They often stayed away from the dirt-floored cellar, but the heating equipment would often fail mysteriously, causing Roger to venture downstairs. Over the 10 years that the family lived in the house, the Warrens made multiple trips to investigate. At one point, Lorraine conducted a seance to attempt to contact the spirits that were possessing the family. During the seance, Carolyn Perron became possessed, speaking in tongues and rising from the ground in her chair.
She became possessed, huh?
Yep.
Huh. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Now, Andrea claims to have secretly witnessed the seance. She said, I thought I was going to pass out. My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice not her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room. Though the movie version of events culminates with Ed performing an exorcism rather than a seance, Lorraine insists that she and her husband would never attempt one, as they must be performed by Catholic priests. After the seance, Roger kicked the Warrens out, worried about his wife's mental stability. According to Andrea, the family continued to live in the house due to financial instability until they were able to move in 1980, at which point the spirits were silenced and the hauntings ceased. So it has something only to do with them, rather than were these ladies extra? I mean, in order to sit there and speak a language and have, I mean, were these ladies sensitive? Were they just didn't know it, or if they'd never done this before?
It's possible. Not everybody knows it, right?
Right, but the other one was speaking in tongues, and then the mother was speaking in a language. So, I mean, I wonder if these ladies were clairvoyant and they were extra sensitives and they were just kind of vulnerable to all of this without even knowing how or what was really hitting them.
Uh-huh.
I mean, why would the spirits be attracted to them out of all people? It makes you wonder what was going on with these ladies, too.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's funny that, I guess, when they moved into the new house, the most curious thing that happened didn't have anything to do with the ghosts, but rather a piece of advice that was given to him by a neighbor. They said, for the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. It wasn't long after that, receiving that fateful piece of advice, that the Perones encountered the first paranormal entity. And as with all hauntings and long-term paranormal experiences, the terrifying events of the real-life conjuring began as strange occurrences that barely registered as paranormal activity. Things moved, weird noises. In an interview with Cynthia Perron, one of the daughters, said that there was a lot of small things happening that no one talked about until it was too late. She said things would be moved all around in different positions than how I left them. Or they'd be shoved up underneath the bed. I would go into my sister's. Of course, you go to your sisters and ask, hey, what'd you do with my toys? And they'd say, nothing. Why? Why would I mess with your toys, Cindy? And that's how it first started. After moving in to their dream home, they almost immediately realized they were living with what they believed to be an entire set of ghost roommates. So it isn't just one. At the onset of the haunting, the Perron children felt that the most of the entities had walked their halls were benevolent, if not benign. The 5 Perron children even claimed that the initial entities acted as babysitters on some nights. The ghosts tucked them in, kissed their foreheads. The way they describe the halcyon days of friendly ghosts gives to their story an air of Leave It to Beaver meets the Munsters. Both Cynthia and Andrea Perron remember the ghost who tucked them in. They even remember the way she smelled. Cynthia said, when we first moved into the house for the first 2 months, there was a woman that came and kissed me every night on the forehead, and I thought it was my mother. Andrea finished her sister's statement. Mom smelled like ivory soap, and the spirit smelled like flowers and fruit.
Flowers and fruit, huh?
It's interesting because the scent is a big thing with a lot of spirits. Perfumes, aftershaves, tobacco. You know what I mean? There's a lot of scent involved with a lot of spirits.
It's true, but also back then perfumes were made with very flowery scents and very
water and
yeah, a lot of flowery, fruity scents, and they were very floral back then. The old time perfumes. So
let's see what else we got here.
I don't know about. I know about now, but I don't know about then. But isn't there kind of a law that if you buy a house, you kind of have to know the history? Isn't if something is weird about it?
No, you don't have to tell any history of a house. In California, there might be other states, but in California you have to disclose if someone died in your house.
Okay.
It's not a rule or law for everyone. It's just certain states that have it. Mm-hmm. We have it in California.
Okay.
That you have to disclose if there's been a murder or a death. You have to disclose, by the way, this many people died here. I don't know if you have to tell them the reasons. I don't know. I'd be curious to look that law up.
Yeah.
To see what are the specifics of the law.
Yeah, because, I mean, if they moved in without knowing that there was a weird history, and, I mean, didn't you... Now, you mentioned that a neighbor gave advice about... Okay, so the neighbor knew. So if the neighbor knew, I mean, and the real estate person knew, I wonder if that house had a hard time being sold and maybe they finally got it at a good price.
But then after learning to live with these friendly ghosts, the Perron family made a go out of it on their new farm. However, it didn't take long for the more malevolent forces to begin creeping into their little slice of heaven. The Perron girls claimed that they were attacked in the barn by unseen entities, and that one night a series of voices began to speak to them about the bodies in their walls. Andrea claiming that her sister Cindy climbed into bed with her one night to tell her about the harrowing news a disembodied voice had delivered. She'd say, "Annie, I keep hearing these voices. It's one voice. It's a lot of voices, but they're all saying the same thing at once." And I say, "Honey, what are you saying?" And she'd say, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." While the girls were dealing with something reaching out to them from beyond the grave, a different series of events began to foreshadow the terror to come. They claimed that at 5:15 in the morning, the smell of rotten flesh would waft through the house, tossing everyone out of bed one by one. Andrea claims that around this time the girls were visited by a male ghost that tortured them so badly that she refuses to give any concrete details. Let's just say there was a very bad male spirit in the home with 5 little girls.
Jeez.
While the entire Perron family had paranormal encounters throughout their time living in the house, Carolyn Perron, the matriarch of the family, seems to have been the most sensitive to the spirits inhabiting the home. In an interview with the Providence Journal, she claims that she knew something was wrong when a woman in gray appeared next to her bed moaning, "Get out, get out. I'll drive you out in death and gloom." The woman the woman in the gray dress could have been Bathsheba Thayer, the witch believed to have been done the most of the haunting in this case. Although she could have been a poltergeist created as a portent of things to come, or one of the many ghosts who dwell within the home. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, said, "Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition that my mother represented."
Makes me wonder if, how this affected those girls going to school.
Oh, I'm sure it did. Kept them away, doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, and also, girls at that age are so vulnerable, especially when it comes to being different and making friends. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine kids in school probably thought about them?
I wonder. That's a question for.
We should ask. We should get Andrea Perron on the show and ask her.
See how she dealt with that at school. Did they tell her friends? Did they keep it up? Mom? Yeah.
That would be a good question for her. Well, the Perrons allege that Bathsheba Thayer's attacks began as harmless poltergeist activity. Now, Bathsheba was actually the woman who used to live there, and she's actually was buried in the churchyard. So she was so as the article said, she was a real person. And they were pinched, poked, and prodded by an invisible force, but things kind of escalated after that. They believed that Thayer wanted them to leave, and the only way she knew how to do that was by torturing Carolyn. And when physically assaulting Carolyn didn't work, the Perrons claimed that she inhabited her body to better horrify them. And possessing her gave Thayer the power to cause the mother and her family bodily harm, and it left Carolyn feeling weak and emotionally drained. Now, I think you have to be really, really sensitive and weak in order for them to do that.
Well, when you got to think, if you're haunted for that long,
it's
going to beat you down. You're going to be physically, mentally exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
And the lower you are, the lower your energy levels, the lower everything.
Right.
It's going to be that much easier, right?
And there wasn't a whole lot of people to call back then about that. Even now, it's something like that is hard to handle. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So one of the strangest parts of this story isn't that the gray witch that haunted the family or the broom ghost that was known to sweep up the kitchen whenever no one was around. It's how the Warrens even came to the Perron family in the first place.
After Carolyn allegedly became possessed with the spirit of Thayer, the Perrons got in touch with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the couple who had worked on the Amityville haunting. Lorraine claims that she sensed a dark presence in the house from the moment, but it doesn't take a seasoned paranormal investigator to surmise that the Perron family was freaked out by the time that they called the Warrens. According to the Perrons, the Warrens cleansed the home and conducted a seance with Carolyn in the family's basement. Unfortunately, the seance didn't go as planned and made things much worse. The Warrens visited the Perron family intermittently over the course of the next decade, but they never were able to fix anything. Lorraine publicly discussed what happened during the seance. She never had. The seance she claims what happened in the basement described her to the core. The things that went on there were so incredibly frightening, it still affects me to even talk about it today. Andrea Perron corroborates Lorraine's story. She claims that she snuck into the basement to see the seance firsthand and was never able to look at her mother the same way again. Her mother began to speak, not of this world, in a voice not of her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room. If you remember The Conjuring, there's a series of escalating games of hide and clap, where one person is blindfolded while the rest of the girls playing run off to hide. In these scenes, the mother is constantly taunted by a pair of ghostly clapping hands belonging to Bathsheba Thayer. The hide and clap scenes are really spooky, but it turns out the real story is much more harrowing. Cynthia Perron claims that one day while the girls were playing hide and seek on the farm, she hid in a pine box without any kind of lock on it, latch, or ventilation. After no one came to find her, she decided to find a new hiding place. She said, "I shoved up to get out of the wood box. It wouldn't open. I'm pushing and pushing, and then I started to really get scared and panic. I'm kicking and pushing and screaming, and nobody can hear me. And finally, after 20 minutes of this, I basically gave up." One of the biggest questions people have about the haunting of the Perron family is, why wouldn't they just leave? The family lived in the rural Rhode Island farmhouse for 9 years, from 71 to 80, and throughout that time, they were set upon by ghosts, both good and evil. Unfortunately, it wasn't financially possible for the family to leave. The haunting was happening during the end of the Nixon administration all the way through the Carter administration. The economy was in the toilet, no matter how your friends are. No one has a room to house 5 teenagers and their mother and father. Aside from that, Andrea Perron notes that the property value on their 200-acre farm was devaluating by the day. The family would have been destitute if we just walked away from the house. In 1980, the Perron family was finally able to sell the house, and as soon as the paperwork was signed, they made a beeline for Georgia and never looked back. Now, the Perrons claimed they're still being haunted by Bathsheba Thayer. During the filming of The Conjuring, the entire family was invited to the set. Initially, they were all going to go, but at the last minute, Carolyn got cold feet and changed her mind. She claimed that she didn't want to make the trip, but there also had to be some trepidation on her part to dig up the past. Andrea Perron claims that while the family was being interviewed, a rogue wind swept over the family, knocking down cameras, lights, and anything that surrounded them. They all agreed it was Bathsheba's curse. It wasn't until they returned to the hotels that evening that they heard about their mother falling and breaking her hip at the exact same time the wind swept over them.
Oh, poor thing.
When the family made it to their mother's hospital room, they claimed that she sat up and said, "Bathsheba's curse. She does not want to be exposed." There are a lot of haunted tales that seem to be unique to the Perron storyline. The haunting that inspired the changeling comes to mind. Yeah, then they go into the changeling. We've done a show about that. and that was about a case where a guy who was renting a giant house lived through an insane haunting, but after he moved out, the ghosts finally stopped bothering people. However, it wasn't the case with the Rhode Island farmhouse. According to Andrea, everyone who lived in the house that we know of has experienced this. Some have left screaming and running for their lives. The man who moved in to began the restoration on the house when we sold it left screaming without his car, without his tools, without his clothing. He never went back to the house, and consequently the people who owned it and adjacent landowners never moved in, and it sat vacant for years. However, according to the current owner, Norma Sutcliffe, the house isn't as haunted as you might have heard. Sutcliffe only claims to have seen and heard people talking in other rooms, footsteps when no one was home, and a strange blue light shooting around a room. After the movie was released, Sutcliffe became unhappy with all the attention surrounding her home and started attempting to disprove the Perron family story. The demonic antagonist of The Conjuring is a witch named Bathsheba Thayer. Yeah, now that just goes on to some of the.
Now, there's not a whole lot of funeral records or historical records about Bathsheba.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, they claim she was involved in a neighbor's child's death, but never went to trial. But there had to have been funeral records about her. You know, what days dates she lived there, what kind of person she was. I don't
think you can see it in this picture, but they're saying that one of the people in these pictures is probably her. It's really hard to see it, though.
Let me see.
You have to look.
One of them is Bathsheba.
If you look online, or I think YouTube, there's an actual video where it takes this old photograph from the 1800s.
Oh my God! Look at that.
And it blows it up and shows you where she's at.
So this is the
That's
people.
The house.
That's the house, and that's the people who were here before.
At that time, yeah.
At that time,
yeah.
And then
from what I understand,
which one did they claim was her?
It's too small. I couldn't tell you. You'd have to look on YouTube. They actually zoom in, but apparently part of the house was originally from 1750 something.
Okay.
So it's really old. It's not just the 1800s. It's the 18th century and the 19th century. So I imagine they just built onto the farmhouse later on.
Yeah.
So, but I thought that was interesting. That I couldn't even imagine having horrible spirits doing things to you constantly.
No.
Touching you.
No.
Pushing you. Your voices, scary voices, saying things to you, just doing horrible things to you.
I've lived in places where there was some yucky stuff going on, or not necessarily yucky stuff, but just hauntings going on.
Yeah.
But not necessarily bad. But
why do they do the seance in the basement? I wonder if it's because of that smell.
Yeah, and I wonder if the seance and now the Warrens claim that they actually got a Catholic priest to come in and do a real exorcism. They wouldn't do it themselves. Yeah. I wonder how much of the exorcism, how much of it calmed down after that, even though it went on for a while after that.
Yeah, we'd have to ask her what happened if they came in. Did they do that? Because she's got 3 books based on into a trilogy of books. Yeah,
because they had to have. I mean, they stayed there for 10 years, so I mean, part of them had to have lived a normal life for a while.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, I'm sure you didn't have spooky stuff happen every single day. Or maybe you did. I don't know.
Well, you get enough family members, it could have.
It could have happened every single day.
You know, I think, honestly, as long as it's not life-threatening, you could probably learn to live with that kind of stuff. It's just normal. You can't move, so you know what? You got to learn to live with it.
Yeah. I guess so. I mean, you know, of course, with the younger kids, it must have been pretty harrowing. I mean,
frightening, I'm sure.
Frightening, you know, if they kept hearing voices and, you know, trying to get reassurance nothing's in the room. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You know, being in your bedroom alone and dark and hearing voices and all kinds of weird stuff going on. So I know that, I mean, that today you probably have more sources to come and check on these things than you did back in 1971, but I'm glad the Warrens, at least they had the Warrens come.
Well, it's interesting that they came back periodically throughout the decade, so they didn't really fix anything.
Yeah.
But I think they were there more to see if can we fix anything and can we document what's going on.
Right.
So it's interesting that Lorraine would not talk about the seance and what happened, and neither would the oldest daughter, that she snuck down to watch it.
Yeah.
So what actually happened at that seance?
Well, they claim that the mom spoke in another language, and
I know, but they said they saw things more frightening than they've never seen before. So I'm really curious.
I don't even think a seance should have been. Why would they even want to do a seance?
Well,
a seance is to call up a spirit. You don't want to call them up. You want them to go.
Well, the Warrens probably wanted to find out who's here giving these people problems. What is it that you want? What is it that you're trying to do?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know how it is with a seance. It calls things to come up rather than...
Well, yeah, you're pointing them out, you're giving them attention, and suddenly, if you give them too much attention, it may make it worse.
Right. So, in my opinion, the seance, in my opinion, was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
To me. But that's just me.
Well, obviously, it didn't fix anything. The Warrens didn't really fix anything at all.
In
the
anything,
movie,
it
it's
kind
different.
of escalated it.
Yeah.
So...
Well, that's always the danger when you do that kind of stuff. Is it going to make it worse, or is it going to make it better?
Right.
That's why sometimes when people smudge their houses or have them blessed, it actually does worse. The spirits get
it stirs
pissed
things
off.
up. It can stir things up.
And they get really angry and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that happen too.
Now you have some comparisons from the movie to the real story, correct?
Yeah. Here's reasons why the true story's Conjuring is the true story is creepier than the movie. I'm going to just go through them very briefly. So, okay, one moment here.
Okay, that was great.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, for one thing, the neighbors advised them to leave their lights on at night. So the neighbors knew that there was, as we mentioned, the neighbors knew that there was paranormal activity. So they advised they leave their lights on, and the neighbors were actually freaked out by the whole house. So that's
so the neighbors just didn't like it.
They didn't like it.
Well,
yeah.
we just covered
the
that neighbors
part.
bought the house
Right.
later and never ever did anything with it for years.
Right, and of course, in the beginning, the ghosts were nice. So you know, the girls were 5 sisters who were nice to each other, and with their toys shifting around to different rooms when they weren't looking. Of course, you know, suspicions, and the girls began fighting with each other, and the mother had to intervene, tell them to stop, and then they didn't realize. I guess they realized later that it was somebody was fooling around with their toys.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course, according to the kids, the mean spirits started to fill the house after that. So I guess you know, I just kind of wonder. Okay, stop for a second. I kind of wonder, how does a house go from kind spirits to mean spirits? It makes you wonder how the mean spirits got attracted after that, you know?
No, because this is where I would go to what you said earlier. The kind spirits picked up on the fact that one or more of the girls, maybe the mother and the girls,
right,
do have some kind of mediumistic abilities that they weren't aware of. So
right.
these spirits are attracted to them, and when these spirits are around them, if there's enough of them, these other evil spirits are going, hey, what are they so obsessed and looking at so much? And they go in and realize, oh, they're aware of them. They can follow them and hear them and interact with them, and then they just took over.
So they were kind of an open vessel for all of that.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, of course, there was the ghost of Bathsheba, who threatened the family, and she was an actual real person who lived there, and she was threatened by the family presence, and and of course the movie talked about it, but people don't realize that she was actually a real person, and we covered that. And then Carolyn actually believed that Bathsheba did inhabit her body, so Carolyn was very susceptible to all of that,
right?
And then of course then there was that a family friend contacted the Warrens. The Warrens were the ones who came in and decided to do something about it. And so actually one of the Carolyn, actually the mother, the father was actually unhappy about somebody else coming into the situation, but actually I think he was thankful for it later. So
at the time, it was probably like, who are these people, and why do I want them in my house?
Right, and then the family claims that Ed and Lorraine made actually things worse.
Well, is that what we were discussing?
Right.
Let's have a seance in the basement and
Yeah,
stir
the
things
seance.
up.
Yeah, a seance wasn't a good idea. Right.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that the seance made things worse. And then hide and clap was worse in real life than in the movie, because in the movie they did hide and clap.
Yep.
So I heard it was actually worse in real life than in the movie. So it was pretty, it was pretty scary when they did it. So. And then also, the Perones couldn't afford to move anywhere else, of course, and
Yep.
they didn't have any money to move anywhere. I mean,
Can't just
financially,
abandon
they
your
just
big
couldn't
house.
do it.
Yeah.
And they do believe that Bathsheba's ghost is still there. Of course, if she's attached to the house, she might be.
Yep.
And, these are all reasons why, the whole story is a lot more involved and scary than the actual movie. And the house's occupants have a long history of paranormal disturbances. So they described that the transition to the house as a calling began 8 months before they even found the property.
Are you talking about the article I'm going to read?
Yeah, it could be that they said that the case that the spirits from the farmhouse featured in The Conjuring were more attached to the family than to the territory. That's what
maybe,
it was told.
But if other people out when they moved out, they said the man who was there when moved out, he ran out screaming and left his clothes, and so I don't believe that. Obviously, he had experiences too, so
yeah,
I don't believe that because of that fact.
And the house's current owner disagrees with all of that. She claims that the house is absolutely not haunted. So
that's because the movie came out and she didn't want looky-loos, probably.
Right.
Looking at the house.
So anyway, and then Bathsheba probably, there's a theory that Bathsheba Thayer was probably not the ghost haunting the family, but it was another ghost.
Well, by the sounds of it, it was crowded in that house.
It sounds like it could have been a lot of ghosts haunting besides Bathsheba.
Yep.
I don't know. They also claim, Lorraine claimed that Bathsheba took the knitting needles to her grave and used them in the hauntings. So I don't know. That there was some knitting needles she used.
Who did?
Bathsheba. And Bathsheba it was rumored that she died of a stroke too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have an article about the and also two more things. Something definitely did happen to the Perone family, even while the present owner, of course, claims the house isn't haunted, but a film crew filmed the home for one of the episodes, and they did find evidence of the paranormal activity.
They did
in
or
the house.
didn't?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
remember,
also
that's going to be on this Halloween.
Right.
There was Ghost Adventures
Yeah.
that shot their live thing there. So that'll be coming up soon.
Right, and then the house, and apparently the house's current owner sued Warner Brothers. I don't know why, but because she wasn't able to live in privacy, and she sued Warner Brothers. Apparently.
Oh wow!
I know.
Boo-hoo.
Right. So you had something about the house being sold or something.
Yes, an update on the house. Apparently, the woman who sued Warner Brothers because she claims that nothing ever happened there, even though I wonder if she was the neighbors that told them to keep their lights on. Interesting. Bought the house, let it sit for years, claimed nothing happened to it. She sold the house very recently.
Oh.
A Maine couple, the real-life haunted farmhouse in the Rhode Island that inspired the movie, was recently purchased by a couple in Maine who admitted they still experience the same paranormal activity that infamously drove out a family in the 1970s. Corey and Jennifer Heinzen from Mexico, Maine were excited when they learned that the 1736 8-acre farmhouse, which was the site of the true story of the haunting of the Perone family, had gone on sale in the quiet village of Harrisville, Rhode Island. We immediately fell in love with it, Heinzen told the Lewiston Sun Journal last month. 8.5 acres, a river in the back, and a pond. It's so serene down there, never mind the story behind the house. The Heinzens closed on the home in late June and hope to restore it and open it up to other paranormal enthusiasts like themselves, but the process has been anything but easy, And as Corey Heinzen admits, I've had a hard time staying there by myself. Footsteps, knocks, we've had lights flash in rooms. And when I say lights flashing in rooms, it's rooms that don't have light in there to begin with. He told KETK earlier this month. The couple said they don't feel the presence is evil, but warned that it is similar to testimony from the Perron family, who claimed their haunting began with innocent and unexplainable happenings in the home. Roger Perron, his wife Carolyn, and their 5 daughters moved into the home in 1971 and had many strange occurrences right away. Missing objects, strange noises, and escalated into evil spirits and reported demonic possession. The family eventually moved out of the home. It was purchased by Norma Sutcliffe, who eventually sued Warner Brothers in 2015 after she claimed the movie encouraged trespassers to visit her property. The Heinzens are still renovating their home with hopes to open it up to visitors, but they told KETK that they currently have 12 cameras set up throughout the house for research purposes. Sometimes we catch it on camera, sometimes we don't, Corey said. That's interesting, though. So they mean business.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of glad that a paranormal investigative couple. Mm-hmm. It's almost like preserving a famous haunted location
right.
for other people to come there, investigate, do investigations, explore, try and collect their own evidence.
Also trying to get to the bottom of this, too.
Yeah.
And figure out what's really there. And these are people with experience and who aren't easily spooked or led astray or chased out.
Exactly. I mean, it's a shame when a lot of these haunted places are torn down. Oh, there's too many looky-loos, and they rip the place down so that people won't go look anymore. Mm-hmm. When, you know, especially if it's famous. Like, this is famous, the Amityville Horror House.
Would you stay there?
Of course I would stay there in a heartbeat. I would stay at the Amityville house in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah.
I just wish somebody owned the Amityville house that was a paranormal enthusiast.
Oh, that would be nice, yeah.
Because I would rent it out. It was me. I would rent it out to paranormal groups nightly to do their own investigations.
Well, who knows? The new owners might do that with this house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It would pay for itself.
It would.
These famous houses, they would totally pay for themselves.
Yeah.
People don't realize that you can have this summer home, like during the summer, maybe you don't do investigations, and you rent it out for the rest of the year. It pays for the house.
Yeah.
And you have property. That's good to have property, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, yeah. So, and I actually put an article on Ecto Portal on how to sell a haunted house, just like any other house, if you're in real estate.
Yeah. Now, what were the states? It was Alaska, California,
think Alaska, South Dakota, and I think California.
You
have to disclose if there's been a death in the house, and also, if there's been a death in the house before you actually sell it, you have to disclose that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but I don't know about other states, or if the real estate laws are similar, like if the house has some kind of weird history, if you have to disclose that. So.
I mean, if you have a death in the house, how do you spin that to sell your house? Read that article on the Facebook page. Maybe you can figure out how to sell your haunted house.
Yeah, because I don't know how much history. I mean, every house has history, but how much of it do you have to disclose? I suppose if it's rumored in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
Who knows? But, you know, you don't want somebody coming back to you and saying, you didn't tell me about this.
Exactly. So. All right, folks, that's tonight's show, The Conjuring, the True Story. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.